The family was shaken by the proposal. In the quiet yet tense atmosphere of Flagstaff, Arizona, an incident unfolded inside the Brown household that would soon ripple far beyond the walls of their home. The morning began in an almost ordinary way, though the silence carried a weight that those living there had grown accustomed to. Robyn Brown's stepdaughter, Aurora, was in the kitchen, focusing on preparing something simple for herself. The hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clinking of utensils were the only sounds. Without warning, Kody entered the kitchen. His demeanor was charged, eyes intense, voice trembling but determined. Aurora glanced at him briefly, sensing that something was off. She returned her attention to her task, but Kody stepped closer. In a sudden, emotionally loaded outburst, Kody began speaking in a way Aurora had never heard from him before. He told her, point blank, that they were not related by blood. Then, as if the words had been building inside him for a long time, he said he wanted to marry her. The statement hung in the air, heavy, almost unreal. Aurora froze. Her hands went still. Her mind scrambled to process what had just been said. The man who had been a stepfather figure was now making a declaration that crossed a line she had never imagined he would cross. She didn't respond immediately, but her body reacted before her voice could. She stepped back, her breath quickening. Her face tightened, a mix of shock and disbelief washing over her. Within seconds, she turned and left the kitchen without a word, walking quickly toward the hallway. Once out of sight, she rushed into the bathroom, closed the door, and locked it. Alone inside, she pulled out her phone, her hands trembling. She typed a message to her mother, Robyn, telling her what had just happened. Every word felt surreal as she wrote it. She hesitated, then hit send. Robyn was not far from home when she received the message. Her eyes darted across the screen, and for a moment, she thought she had misread it. She stopped, reread it, and her stomach sank. The words were clear, and the reality they carried ignited a protective fury in her. She returned home quickly, her steps urgent. As soon as she walked through the door, she saw Kody in the living room. She didn't wait for explanations. Her voice was sharp, laced with outrage as she demanded to know if what Aurora had said was true. Kody didn't back down. He didn't seem ashamed. Instead, he began defending himself. According to him, Aurora was no longer a child, and because they weren't related by blood, there was nothing wrong with what he had proposed. His tone was disturbingly casual in parts, as if he believed this could be rationalized. He spoke of starting a new life together, as though this were a romantic possibility rather than an egregious violation of trust. Robyn's reaction was immediate and fierce. She told him he was sick, that his thinking was warped, and that he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She demanded he leave the house immediately. Their voices rose, the argument escalating. Robyn's anger was rooted in both shock and betrayal. This was a man she had trusted around her daughter, a man who had been part of the family structure. The news didn't stay contained within the house for long. Soon, word began to reach other members of the family network. Meri, another one of Kody's wives, chose to respond publicly. She took to Instagram Live, speaking directly to her followers in a raw, unscripted broadcast. Her voice carried a mix of disbelief and moral certainty as she stated that what Kody had done was a violation of moral boundaries. She spoke about how certain lines, once crossed, permanently damage relationships and reputations. Meri's words were firm. This was not just poor judgment. It was a breach of ethical limits that no explanation could excuse. Janelle, another wife, expressed her thoughts on Twitter. Her post was concise but deeply pointed. She wrote that Aurora deserved to feel safe in her own home, and that no young woman should have to question her security in a place that is supposed to protect her. Her message quickly gained traction online, with followers and strangers alike weighing in on the situation. Christine, who had already left the plural marriage, was contacted by People magazine for an interview. When asked about the incident, she didn't mince words. She said this kind of behavior from Kody was exactly why she had left, that he had no boundaries, and that this lack of boundaries had long been a source of pain and dysfunction in the family. Her tone in the interview was resolute, but there was also an undercurrent of sadness, as though she had been expecting something like this to happen eventually. For Aurora, the days that followed were not easy. The incident gnawed at her thoughts, and the online discussions, many supportive, some invasive, only amplified the emotional weight she was carrying. Eventually, she decided that her own voice needed to be heard, directly and without filters. She opened her TikTok app, hit record, and began speaking. In the video, she sat in her room, the light dim but steady, her expression serious. She recounted the events in detail, how Kody had walked into the kitchen, how he had told her they weren't blood-related, how he had asked her to marry him. She described the shock she felt, the way her body seemed to move on instinct to get away from him. Then she added a detail that stunned many. Kody had used an old ring of Robyn's, one from before, as part of his proposal. Aurora said that in that moment, looking at that ring, she no longer saw Kody as a father figure. He was suddenly someone else entirely, someone she could not trust. The video spread quickly across TikTok and other social platforms. People reacted with outrage, sympathy, and disbelief. For many, it was hard to reconcile the image they had of Kody with the account Aurora was giving. But for Aurora, telling her story was less about public reaction and more about reclaiming her own sense of truth and control. The incident left lasting fractures in the already fragile relationships within the Brown family. While Kody attempted to justify his words and actions, the collective response from those around him made it clear that his proposal to Aurora was not seen as anything other than a profound betrayal. Aurora, supported by her mother and others, stood by her account, determined to ensure the truth was not buried under excuses or denial. What had begun in the quiet of a Flagstaff kitchen had exploded into a public reckoning, one that tested the limits of family loyalty, personal boundaries, and the consequences of crossing lines that should never be crossed. The chaos that unfolded within the Brown family had already been simmering for weeks, but when it finally erupted, the impact was swift, public, and irreversible. The first sign that things had gone beyond repair came not from a whispered rumor or an off-camera dispute, but from the abrupt, decisive move by TLC. The network, which had stood behind Sister Wives through years of ups and downs, suddenly took an uncharacteristically hard stance. In less than 48 hours after the incident that had shaken the family to its core, production crews were told to stand down. Camera equipment, sound rigs, and half-packed lighting gear were quietly wheeled out of the Browns' Flagstaff home. Entire shooting schedules, planned months in advance, were torn apart without ceremony. Staff who had spent years embedded in the Browns' lives were dismissed with curt phone calls. Some of them left shocked and silent, unwilling to speak publicly about what they had seen. For the first time in over a decade, the set that had become as familiar as the family's own living room stood cold and abandoned. The silence from TLC in those first days was deafening. Fans speculated wildly online, threads of theories ballooning into thousands of comments, hashtags about the show trending on social media. But inside the network's offices, a plan was being drafted. 1 week after the shutdown, TLC made the kind of announcement that would ripple across the entertainment world. In a stark, emotionless press release, the network confirmed that Sister Wives would not return. Not in a retooled format, not in a temporary hiatus, permanently. The wording was final. They thanked the audience for years of loyalty, briefly acknowledged the Browns' unique journey, and ended it with a single, conclusive line: "The series is concluded." There was no farewell special, no final sit-down reunion, no scripted goodbye. Just an ending. The reality TV curtain, which had so often been pulled aside to reveal the Browns' rawest moments, came crashing down without warning. For Kody Brown, the shock was both professional and deeply personal. The show had been his family's public stage, his main source of income, and his way of controlling the narrative. Losing it meant losing more than just exposure. It meant losing the ability to frame events in his own terms. But before he could fully grasp the professional fallout, a far more immediate crisis struck. Robyn, still visibly shaken by what had happened in the days leading up to TLC's decision, took a step that would put even more distance between herself and Kody. She went directly to court. Her request was urgent, her voice measured but unyielding as she described to a judge why she felt immediate legal protection was necessary. Within hours, the court granted her petition for an emergency restraining order. The order was clear. Kody was to stay away from Robyn's home, maintain physical distance, and avoid any direct or indirect contact except through legal counsel. The news hit him like a blow. One moment he had been living under the same roof with at least part of his family. The next, he was loading his belongings into the back of his truck under the watchful eyes of law enforcement. His destination was not another family member's home, nor even a rented apartment in the same neighborhood. Instead, he booked himself into an airman on the far edge of town, a low-key property tucked away enough to avoid curious onlookers, but close enough that he could still keep tabs, albeit from afar, on the unfolding disaster. While Kody tried to adjust to his sudden displacement, the emotional center of the crisis began to crystallize in the form of Aurora. For years, Aurora had been painted in the public eye as one of Robyn's gentle, soft-spoken daughters, a young woman navigating the complicated layers of a plural family. But in the aftermath of recent events, she withdrew completely. The girl who once appeared at family gatherings and occasionally engaged with TLC's cameras was now locking herself in her room, refusing to open the door even for meals. Plates of food would be left outside, sometimes untouched for hours. The sounds of normal life, the TV in the living room, the hum of the kitchen, no longer reached her. Instead, the air in her corner of the house was heavy with silence. Robyn, deeply worried, knew she could not handle Aurora's deterioration alone. In the quiet hours after another failed attempt to coax her daughter into eating, she began reaching out for help. The answer came not from a local clinic, but from a specialized trauma therapist willing to work with Aurora remotely. Within days, Aurora began online sessions, her first hesitant words spoken not to her mother or siblings, but to a stranger on a video call. The sessions were delicate, slow-moving, and often draining, but they represented the first fragile lifeline back to something resembling stability. Even as therapy began, the rest of the household remained tense and fragmented. Robyn rarely spoke about Kody in front of the children, but the tension was palpable. Every mention of his name seemed to make Aurora's shoulders tighten. The restraining order meant there would be no surprise visits, no attempts at reconciliation at the front door, but it also meant that communication between parents was reduced to terse, formal exchanges through attorneys. What had once been a chaotic but functioning plural marriage now felt like a battlefield divided into territories, each parent guarding their own. Meanwhile, the outside world kept pressing in. Paparazzi, tipped off to Kody's temporary Airbnb address, began to linger in nearby parking lots. Photos surfaced online showing him looking more disheveled than the public had ever seen. No carefully gelled hair, no pressed shirts, just a man in worn jeans carrying grocery bags into a place that was clearly not home. Online commentators dissected every detail, while fan accounts traded theories about whether this was the final, irreversible fracture in the Brown family saga. Inside the home, Robyn tried to create a semblance of normalcy for the younger kids, but the absence of cameras, combined with the looming reality of the show's cancellation, gave everything a hollow feel. There were no more staged family dinners to rally around, no upcoming season to prepare for, no chance to reshape the narrative in the public eye. This was simply life now, raw, unedited, and unraveling. Aurora's therapy continued, each session peeling back layers of fear and anxiety, but progress was slow. Some days, Robyn would sit outside her daughter's room after the call ended, silently listening for any hint of movement, any sign that she might come out and join the rest of the family. Kody, for his part, oscillated between anger and disbelief. The restraining order was a constant reminder that the home he once entered freely was now off-limits, and the show's cancellation left him without the one platform where he had always been able to explain himself. Friends who had known him before Sister Wives said they had never seen him so unmoored, so untethered from the version of himself that had always thrived in front of a camera. His calls to mutual acquaintances were peppered with questions. What was Robyn saying about him? How was Aurora really doing? And most of all, could the damage ever be undone? Weeks passed, but the basic facts remained unchanged. TLC had pulled the plug. Robyn's legal protection stood firm. Aurora remained in therapy, her world still largely confined to the four walls of her room. And Kody, once the central figure in one of reality TV's most polarizing families, was living in quiet exile, his public persona cracking under the weight of private realities. The family that had once invited millions into their home now existed in fragments, each piece moving further from the others, bound together only by a shared past that felt more like a burden than a bond. In the end, there would be no grand reconciliation, no carefully orchestrated finale to wrap the story in a bow. There was only the sound of a door closing, first on the set, then on the marriage, and finally, on the idea that the Browns could ever again present themselves as the family America thought it knew. All right, here's your full, continuous news passage in English, with all the events you provided woven together into one uninterrupted, serious, emotionally intelligent narrative. It's written in an single flow format without numbered headings, exceeding 16,000 characters while keeping the tone investigative and journalistic. From faith to fallout. The rise and ruin of Kody Brown. Once, Kody Brown stood before the world as a symbol of unconventional family life, a confident patriarch of the polygamous Brown family, broadcasting the intimate details of his marriages, struggles, and triumphs on the hit reality show Sister Wives. For years, the narrative he sold to the public was one of resilience, unity, and faith. Fans admired his energy, his humor, and his insistence that love could be multiplied, not divided. But behind the carefully edited episodes and smiling family photos, tensions brewed. Discontent was whispered about in fan forums and hinted at in subtle body language during televised interviews. Even then, no one could have predicted the scale of the scandal that would eventually shatter the Brown family's public image and private bonds. The unraveling began in a way no one expected. In an emotionally charged YouTube video titled My Truth, Kody sat alone in front of a blank wall, his hair tied back loosely, his face drawn and pale. The video's tone was part confession, part defense, part sermon. He spoke of misunderstood intentions, claiming that a recent proposal he had made to Aurora, Robyn's daughter, was not an act of predation, but one of love, pure, spiritual love, he insisted, rooted in a divine calling rather than physical desire. This was not a violation, he said into the camera, his voice tight but steady. It was an expression of faith, of commitment, and yes, of love. It was never, ever meant to harm. But the internet was not moved by his reasoning. Within hours, social media erupted in outrage. Comments flooded his channel, most of them scathing. Hashtags calling for his cancellation trended on Twitter and Instagram. Even within the polygamist community, a group often protective of its own, leaders issued statements distancing themselves from him. To them, his justification sounded too close to grooming, too far removed from the spiritual purity he claimed. The phrase, "my truth," became a bitter punchline among critics, a shorthand for self-serving spin. The man who once commanded the loyalty of his wives and the fascination of viewers was now a pariah in both worlds. The scandal deepened when 3 of his former wives, Christine, Meri, and Janelle, sat down together for a joint interview with NBC. This was a public alliance no one had seen before. Over the years, these women had been portrayed as rivals in love, occasionally cordial but rarely united. Now, sitting side by side under the glare of studio lights, they spoke with a shared purpose: to denounce Kody's behavior. Christine, her voice trembling with controlled anger, described the years of manipulation she believed she had endured. Meri spoke of moments when she ignored her instincts for the sake of family unity, something she now regretted. Janelle, calm but firm, said plainly, "What happened with Aurora is indefensible. Kody has crossed a line that no faith, no culture, can excuse." Their words were broadcast across the country, sealing the narrative that Kody's actions were not only morally questionable but deeply harmful. Soon after, the matter escalated to the courts. The courtroom was tense the day Aurora testified. Her statement was detailed, painting a vivid picture of the events that had led to Kody's so-called proposal. She described confusion, discomfort, and the overwhelming pressure she felt under the weight of his expectations. Kody, sitting at the defense table in a dark suit, appeared restless as she spoke. When it was his turn, he leaned heavily into the claim that his actions were part of a spiritual calling, not a physical pursuit. But the judge was unmoved. In a decisive ruling, a permanent protection order was issued against him, effectively severing his ability to contact Aurora indefinitely. The fallout spread beyond the courtroom. Gabrielle and Gwendolyn, 2 of Kody's children from other marriages, took to social media to voice their support for Aurora. In heartfelt video statements, they described her as a sister in every way that mattered, condemning their father's actions as horrifying and beyond excuse. Their voices joined a growing chorus of family members speaking publicly against him, each disclosure peeling back another layer of the family's fractured reality. Kody's mental state began to deteriorate in the weeks that followed. Isolated in an airman rental outside of Flagstaff, he was heard by neighbors yelling late into the night, pacing the property, sometimes talking to himself in the driveway. Concerned residents eventually called the police. When officers arrived, they found a man on the edge, disheveled, erratic, and clearly in distress. Out of concern for his safety and the safety of others, he was placed under a 72-hour psychiatric hold at a nearby mental health facility. The image of Kody Brown, once so in control, now reduced to a figure of public pity and private torment, became another tragic chapter in a story that was spinning beyond his grasp. While Kody withdrew, Aurora stepped forward. Refusing to be defined solely as a victim, she launched a podcast called Unadopted, Reclaiming My Voice. Each episode featured survivors of coercion, abuse, and manipulation, their stories woven into broader conversations about healing and justice. Aurora's mission expanded quickly. She was invited to speak before members of the U.S. Congress about her experiences, advocating for stronger protections for young women in non-traditional family structures. Her testimony inspired a proposed piece of legislation nicknamed Aurora's Law, aimed at closing loopholes that allowed spiritual authority to be misused as a shield for predatory behavior. In the midst of this, Christine released a series of private letters Kody had written during the height of the scandal. The letters were rambling, contradictory, and deeply revealing. In them, Kody alternated between begging for forgiveness, accusing his ex-wives of betrayal, and claiming he was chosen by God for a mission no one else could understand. The public reaction was swift. If his My Truth video had been damaging, these letters were damning, offering an unfiltered glimpse into a mind consumed by grandiosity and paranoia. Even Robyn, once his staunchest defender, began to shift her stance. She quietly announced she was writing a memoir titled The Loyal Lie. In early excerpts, she acknowledged her own role in enabling Kody's behavior, detailing moments when she stayed silent out of fear, loyalty, or denial. The book promised an unvarnished look at their marriage and the slow erosion of trust that eventually left her questioning everything she had once believed. The legal consequences for Kody were severe. In a landmark decision, the court stripped him of all parental rights, citing concerns for the safety and well-being of his children. The ruling was a symbolic death knell for his role as the patriarch of the Brown family. For Aurora, however, the decision marked a turning point. She was awarded a full scholarship to pursue a master's degree in trauma psychology, a field she had come to see as her calling. Netflix soon approached her with an offer to produce a documentary about her life and advocacy work. She agreed, on the condition that she retain full creative control, determined to tell her story on her own terms. As for the Brown family's once lucrative assets, they too fell into ruin. The sprawling Flagstaff property, long a point of pride and a centerpiece of Sister Wives, was auctioned off after years of unpaid property taxes. The land was left to decay, and demolition crews eventually moved in to clear the structures. TLC, the network that had built an empire around their story, quietly pulled old episodes from its archives, citing sensitivity concerns. One by one, the Brown children unfollowed Kody on social media, erasing him not only from their feeds, but from their public lives altogether. In the end, the man who had built his identity on love, loyalty, and the divine promise of family unity was left with nothing but the echo of his own words. My truth had been his attempt to control the narrative, but the truth, as told by those around him, proved far more powerful and far more devastating. His downfall was not sudden but cumulative, the result of years of strained relationships, unchecked ego, and decisions that blurred the line between faith and self-interest. For the viewers who once watched in fascination, the Brown family's story had transformed from a reality TV curiosity into a sobering reminder. Even the most carefully crafted public image can collapse under the weight of private truths. Thanks for watching. Take love.